The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Speaker.
The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, we in Labor support this bill, and we support it wholeheartedly in that we believe that any improvements to the NZ Super Fund, or colloquially called the Cullen Fund, as set up by the Honourable Dr Michael Cullen, are to be applauded. And I do take on what the Minister said in terms of the independence of the fund. When it was set up and the Guardians put in place by Dr Michael Cullen, one of the key features was that independence, and not only that, that there was a requirement, and it may seem self-evident to some, but a requirement for the fund to invest to world's best practice. And there has been from time to time political pressure from some parties that would like to designate rather than encourage or promote, but would like to designate that the super fund invest in X or Y, or invest very heavily in New Zealand, which, you know, of itself is a laudable aim, or invest in responsible investment, even though the definition of that is somewhat vague and depends who you ask. The Guardians and the legislation has always resisted that proposition, because at the end of the day, those Guardians are managing taxpayers' money. They're managing money that is supposed to, certainly up until the suspension of payments from the government's coffers into the fund in around, I think, 2009. The aim of that fund was to offset, as the Minister of Finance has said, national superannuation, and to provide a buffer in respect of the pension. I would note, though, with interest, that since there was the National Party, for the record, that opposed the fund, and again, sir, we must be having, this is the second bill where national ministers have got up and had a road to Damascus experience, and what's the biblical term? The scales have fallen from their eyes, and they have, you know. Yeah, I thank you, Reverend. I bow to my religious colleague in the front row, and have sort of, you know, had a turnaround, and what they opposed vociferously in opposition, often calling some of these things communism and other things, great colourful language. Once they got their feet under the cabinet table, worked out that, okay, it wasn't their idea, but it was a damn good one. I think the tragedy of this fund, and I do, along with the Minister, thank the Guardians and those professional investors who have grown this fund. Since its inception in 2003, the fund's returned on average 10.3% a year. It returned 18% on its investments last year and lifts its value to 29.6 billion as at June 2015. The tragedy, however, is since the government suspended its payments in 2009, had those payments continued, it is estimated by independent advice that the fund would be worth something in the order of $47.8 billion. And the argument was, well, we're not going to borrow money to, you know, put into the super fund and invest, even though, you know, we're getting sort of on average 10.3%, which was a hell of a lot better than anybody else was getting at the market right through the duration of this fund. But actually, the government was prepared, of course, to borrow for a tax cut. It wasn't prepared to borrow to invest, it was prepared to borrow for a tax cut. And I note Mr Bennett will be the next on his feet to give us a very authoritative dissertation on this piece of legislation. We await with bated breath, sir. But the tragedy is that those payments weren't kept up, that the government decided to suspend them. The government said that it won't resume them until net debt is 20% of GDP, and on current predictions that's to 2020-21. So that, I think, is a tragedy, because all New Zealanders, I think, across the political spectrum, supported the inception of the fund. Many were a little bit concerned, you know, government setting up a fund in this way, but the Minister did make comments, and I do support them, in respect of maintaining the independence of the fund from the sticky fingers of politicians. I worry about more the sticky fingers of national politicians as they go searching for money anywhere they can. You know, in the next round of asset sales, perhaps, as we debated last week. But it is appropriate, because politicians of themselves are not experts, very few of them anyway, perhaps the Prime Minister is, and I say that in all seriousness, are not experts generally in investing money and investing and working and managing funds. So it is important especially that member, it is important that for public integrity and public confidence, that independence is maintained. I share the Minister's view about ensuring that the fund does not take a majority interest for the reasons that the Minister has made, and that would take the focus off pure management of funds if you're effectively trying to run the companies that you have a majority stake in. I think there are a number that, this fund has proved its worth. I would argue that the sooner we can recommit to and re-engage in the government instalments or the government funding, the better off we'll be. I suppose this combined with KiwiSaver is as good as you get unless you go to compulsory superannuation, as our Australian cousins have. It's probably the next best thing, but it is the government being responsible. And for those who opposed it, they've been proved wrong. For those who are sceptics, they've been proved wrong. It has more than exceeded its obligations, well ahead of most other funds, I'm told, in the market. So we support the bill, sir. We would urge the government to resume as soon as possible payments into that fund. $47.8 billion as opposed to $29.6 billion is a huge gap. Imagine where we could have been if the government had met the former Labor government's commitments and continued that funding regime. They'd actually be ahead of the game. If you balanced up the revenue against the interest paid on the loan, they'd be well ahead of the game on an average 10.3% gain. So, sir, we support the legislation. I don't think there should be a lot of argument about this legislation. As I say, some parties have the view perhaps that these funds should be directed almost in its investment profile. I don't share that view. The only requirement should be that they invest to world's best practice, because there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders going forward as we age as a population, which will come and are depending and come to depend on how this fund performs as a buffer with an ageing population. And we wrote it, we initiated it, they opposed it, we've now brought them on side, which is great, they're now for it. It would be great if the government could support their views with some dollars out of the coffers, because mark to mark, this is an extremely good investment, and the guardians and the investors and fund managers and the super funds, sir, should be congratulated for what they've done since its inception in 2003.